The stars bent and twisted as 300 massive warships tore through the fabric of space itself. Emerging at the edge of humanity's solar system, like predators circling wounded prey, Commander Vexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest. His four eyes scanning the primitive star system before him with barely concealed contempt. This would be his 73rd world brought under Krell Imperial rule, and he expected it to be as simple as all the others. The blue-green planet called Earth hung in the distance, unaware that its days of independence were now measured in hours rather than years. "Sir, we had arrived at the target coordinates," his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking with anticipation. The crew had not seen real combat in months. Most species surrendered the moment they saw the Armada's size. Vexter nodded slowly, his armored form reflecting the dim red light of the bridge. He had conquered the warrior clans of Dravix Prime, brought the technological marvels of the Turellian collective to their knees, and watched 100 proud civilizations bow before Krell might. This world of soft-skinned mammals would fall even faster meanwhile. Orbiting Earth at station, keeping position 7,000 kilometers above the Atlantic Ocean, Captain Daniel Morris watched his sensor displays with growing concern. The signatures were unlike anything humanity had encountered before, and there were so many of them. "Lieutenant Grant, confirm those readings," he said quietly, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of his tactical screen. Sophie Grant, his tactical officer and the youngest person ever to reach that position on a defense station, worked her controls with practiced efficiency. Her fingers danced across the haptic interface as she cross-referenced the data with everything in Earth's extensive database of theoretical alien technologies. "Confirmed, Captain," she replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was reporting. 300 capital-class warships, each one approximately 2 kilometers in length. They are holding position at the edge of the solar system near Neptune's orbit. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Earth's entire defense fleet consisted of 42 combat-capable vessels, and even those were outmatched in size by a factor of 10. He opened the priority channel to Earth Defense Command on the surface, knowing that Admiral Kevin Price would already be aware of the situation, but needing to hear the orders directly. Sentinel-7 to command. "We have confirmed hostile contact at Neptune," Daniel reported, using the formal protocols that seemed almost absurd in the face of such overwhelming force. The response came within seconds, Admiral Price's calm voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The man had been preparing for this moment ever since the first detection of faster-than-light travel nearly a decade ago. "Acknowledged, Sentinel-7, Price said from his command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by holographic displays showing every defensive asset humanity possessed. "All stations maintain current posture and await further instructions. Do not, I repeat, do not initiate any hostile actions." Daniel acknowledged the order and closed the channel, then turned to Sophie. Her dark eyes met his, and he could see the same question reflected there that burned in his own mind. What could they possibly do against such a force? On the lunar surface, in a facility that officially did not exist according to any public record, Dr. Helen Carr stared at her experimental apparatus with a mixture of terror and hope. She had been working on quantum entanglement applications for 17 years, ever since her graduate work at MIT. And now her theoretical research might be humanity's only chance. Her assistant, a young physicist named Ryan Cole, rushed into the laboratory with a datapad clutched in his trembling hands. "Doctor, they are here," he said unnecessarily. Everyone on the moon base had seen the alerts. "The board is asking if your project is ready for deployment." Helen looked at the massive machine before her, a device that had consumed billions in funding and represented concepts that most of her colleagues thought were impossible. The theoretical Application of quantum entanglement as a weapon had been dismissed by every other species in the galaxy as impractical. The energy requirements too high and the targeting too imprecise, but humanity had one advantage. They did not know it was supposed to be impossible. Tell them we need 18 hours to calibrate the field generators, she said, her mind already racing through the final adjustments required. And tell them it will only work once after that. Everyone will know how to shield against it. Back in the darkness of space near Neptune, Commander Vexter composed his message to the primitives below. It was the same message he had sent to 72 other worlds, modified only to include the specific designation of this planet, people of Earth. The transmission began. Broadcast on every frequency humanity used for communication. You are hereby notified that your world now falls under the authority of the Krell Empire. You will surrender all military assets immediately and prepare to receive occupation forces within one planetary. Rotation resistance will be met with complete annihilation. You have 24 of your hours to comply in the command center. Admiral Price listened to the translation with an expression that revealed nothing. He was a career military officer who had seen combat in 3 different regional conflicts before the unification of Earth's defense forces. And he had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged bullies. He looked at the faces around him. Generals, admirals, politicians, scientists, all of them waiting for his response to this ultimatum. Compose a reply, he said calmly, his Midwestern accent unchanged by the stress. Tell them we respectfully decline their generous offer. His staff stared at him in shock. But Price simply smiled. It was not a warm smile, but rather the expression of a man who held cards his opponents could not see, and open a channel to Dr. Carr on the moon. He added, ask her if she can cut her timeline to 12 hours. I have a feeling we are going to need her miracle sooner than expected on the eternal conquest. Vexter received Earth's response and laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound that made his crew shift uncomfortably in their stations. They refuse, he announced with obvious amusement. These mammals actually believe they can resist the might of the Empire. His tactical officer brought up a holographic display showing Earth's pathetic defenses. Orbital stations with primitive weapons, ships that still used chemical propulsion for maneuvering, defensive satellites that relied on outdated projectile technology. Shall we advance and begin the subjugation? The officer asked. Igor Livixter considered the question. Normally he would grant the full 24 hours as protocol demanded. But something about this world's arrogant refusal irritated him more than usual. We advance in 6 hours, he decided. Let them watch their doom approach and reconsider their foolishness. Perhaps some of them will survive to serve the Empire if they surrender before we arrive. The order went out across the Armada. All ships were to move to attack formation and prepare for combat operations. 300 warships began their slow, terrifying advance toward the inner solar system. Captain Daniel Morris watched them come on his sensors. Each ship a mountain of metal and weapons moving with inexorable purpose. He had already sent his non-essential crew to the escape pods. Knowing that Sentinel-7 would likely be among the first targets destroyed, Sophie Grant remained at her station, refusing to leave despite his direct order. She had family on Earth below, parents in California and a younger brother in college. And if she was going to die, she wanted to die defending them. Captain, she said softly, if this is the end, I just want you to know it has been an honor serving with you. Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. But then his communication panel blinked with an incoming encrypted message. Eyes only from Admiral Price, he opened it and read the brief text, his expression shifting from resignation to something else entirely, something that might have been hope. Lieutenant, he said carefully, I think you should cancel those escape pod preparations. Sir? Sophie looked confused. Daniel smiled for the first time in hours. It was a grim smile, but genuine nonetheless. Admiral Price just sent new orders, he explained, pulling up a tactical program he had never seen before in all his years of service. Apparently, Dr. Carr has been busy. The Imperial Armada crossed into the orbit of Mars like a swarm of metal locusts, their formation perfect and their weapons primed for the slaughter that Vexter anticipated with growing satisfaction. He had spent the journey reviewing Earth's defensive capabilities, and each analysis only confirmed his initial assessment that this would be laughably simple. His second in command, a scarred veteran named Corthax, who had lost 3 limbs in the Dravix campaigns, approached with a tactical update on a glowing data tablet. Commander, our scouts have completed their survey of the human fleet, Corthax reported, his mechanical replacement arm whirring softly as he manipulated the controls. They possess 42 combat vessels, none larger than 500 meters. Their weapons appear to be plasma-based, with an effective range of approximately 50,000 kilometers. Vexter nodded dismissively. The Eternal Conquest alone carried enough firepower to destroy every human ship simultaneously, and he commanded 300 vessels of equal or greater capability. What of their ground defenses? He asked, more out of protocol than genuine interest. Primitive missile systems, energy shields that our weapons will penetrate in seconds, scattered military installations that pose no threat to orbital bombardment. Corthax recited the list with professional detachment. Commander, I must ask, why are we proceeding so cautiously? We could end this in minutes. It was a fair question. Vexter had ordered the fleet to advance slowly, maintain defensive formations as if approaching a peer adversary rather than this collection of primitives, because I have learned never to underestimate an enemy until they are broken at my feet. Vexter replied, memories of the Tyrellian ambush flickering through his mind. That battle had cost him 12 ships before he adjusted his tactics. We will do this properly. On Sentinel-7, Captain Daniel Morris reviewed the classified files that Admiral Price had transmitted, his disbelief growing with every paragraph. What Dr. Carr and her team had accomplished seemed to violate every law of physics he understood, which admittedly was not his area of expertise, but still Sophie Grant read over his shoulder, her expression shifting from confusion to awe to something approaching fear. This cannot be real, she whispered, forgetting military protocol in her shock. Captain, they are saying they can shut down every enemy ship simultaneously without firing a shot. That is impossible. Apparently not, Daniel replied, scrolling through the technical specifications that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all he understood them. Dr. Carr's team has been working on weaponized quantum entanglement for almost 2 decades. Sophie shook her head slowly. She had a degree in astrophysics from Stanford and had published 3 papers on quantum mechanics during her undergraduate years. But this technology was beyond anything she had ever encountered. Even if the theory is sound, the energy requirements would be astronomical, she protested, her scientific mind refusing to accept what seemed impossible. You would need a power source equivalent to a small star. Daniel pointed to a section of the file that showed a schematic of the lunar facility. At its heart was a fusion reactor that dwarfed anything else humanity had ever constructed, powered by helium-3 mined from the lunar regolith over the past decade. They have been preparing for this day longer than any of us realized, he said quietly in the command center beneath the Rockies. Admiral Kevin Price stood before a holographic display that showed both the advancing Krell fleet and the status of Dr. Carr's weapon system. The countdown timer in the corner showed 11 hours and 43 minutes until the device would be ready to fire. His chief of staff, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, who had served with him for 15 years, approached with updated casualty projections. Sir, if the quantum weapon fails, Our conventional forces will be overwhelmed in approximately 7 minutes of engagement, she reported bluntly. Patricia had never believed in sugarcoating bad news. Civilian casualties could reach the billions within the first hour. Price nodded grimly. He had seen the same projections, had spent sleepless nights reviewing every possible scenario and outcome. How is the evacuation proceeding? He asked, though he knew the answer would not be encouraging. We have moved 3 million people into the deep shelters, Patricia replied. But that represents less than 1% of the global population, sir. If this goes wrong, there is nowhere to hide. Price looked at the timer again. Watching the seconds tick away, Dr. Carr had promised him that the weapon would work, that her calculations were sound, and her team had tested every component 1,000 times, but promises meant little in the face of 300 warships crewed by beings who had conquered most of the known galaxy. Contact Dr. Carr, he ordered. I need to speak with her directly, on the moon. Helen Carr was drowning in equations and calibration sequences. Her team of 12 scientists and engineers working around the clock to prepare the quantum entanglement device for its first and only operational use. They had dubbed it Project Silence, because that was exactly what it would create. Complete and total silence across the electromagnetic spectrum. Ryan Cole monitored the power buildup in the fusion core, his eyes red from lack of sleep and the strain of staring at monitors for 18 straight hours. Doctor, we are at 67% charge, he announced. The field generators are synchronizing properly, and the entangled particles are holding stable. Helen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had distributed micro-drones throughout the Krell fleet during what the aliens believed was a simple scanning operation. Using humanity's first contact probe as a delivery vehicle, the Krell had detected the probe, scanned it, and dismissed it as primitive and harmless. They never noticed the thousands of microscopic devices that had attached themselves to every major ship in their armada, each one carrying a quantum entangled particle, paired with its twin in the lunar facility when Project Silence activated. Those particles would create a field that severed all electromagnetic communication within a radius of 1 million kilometers. Ship systems that relied on electronic signals would simply stop functioning, leaving the Krell vessels as nothing more than floating metal coffins. Dr. Carr, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Admiral Price on the secure channel, his face appearing on her monitor with an expression of controlled tension. I need your honest assessment. Will this work? Helen met his gaze through the screen, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Billions of lives depended on her answer, and a lie now would serve no purpose. Admiral, the theory is sound, and our tests have been successful on smaller scales, she said carefully. But we have never attempted anything of this magnitude. The quantum field we are creating is 10,000 times larger than our largest successful test. That is not what I asked, Price said gently but firmly. Will it work? Helen thought about her daughter living in Seattle, her parents in their retirement home in Florida, her colleagues who had dedicated their lives to science rather than profit. She thought about all the people on Earth who would die if she was wrong. Yes, she said finally. It will work. Price nodded once, a slight relaxation visible in his shoulders. He needed that certainty, even if it might prove false, because doubt would paralyze him at the moment when decisiveness was most critical. How much longer? He asked. 10 hours and 12 minutes, Helen replied, glancing at her own countdown timer. The Krell will be in firing range in 8 hours, Price informed her, his voice still calm but with an edge of urgency. Can you accelerate the process? Helen looked at Ryan, who was already shaking his head. They were pushing the fusion reactor beyond its design limits as it was, and rushing the final calibrations could introduce errors that would render the entire weapon useless. No, sir, she said regretfully. If we rush this, we risk catastrophic failure. The field might collapse, or worse, it might expand beyond our control and affect our own systems. Price considered this for a long moment. 2 hours was not an insurmountable gap, but it meant Earth's conventional forces would have to hold the line long enough for Project Silence to charge. Understood, he said finally. Do what you need to do. Doctor, we will buy you the time. The channel closed, and Helen turned back to her work with renewed focus. Every second counted now. Every calculation had to be perfect above Mars. Vexter studied the human defensive positions with professional interest. They had pulled back most of their fleet to Earth orbit, concentrating their forces around the orbital stations and major population centers. It was a defensive posture that made tactical sense but would ultimately prove futile. Concentrated targets were easier to destroy than scattered ones, and the Krell weapons had been designed specifically to overwhelm defensive shields through sustained bombardment. All ships, advance to engagement range, he ordered. Maintain formation Delta 7, and prepare to demonstrate what happens to species who refuse the Empire's generosity. The Armada surged forward, crossing the orbit of Earth's moon with ominous purpose on every human vessel and station. Alarm klaxons blared, and crews rushed to battle stations they all knew were inadequate. Captain Daniel Morris sealed his combat suit and took his position on the bridge of Sentinel-7. Sophie Grant and his side doing the same. If they were going to die, they would die at their posts defending their world, all weapons ready. Commander Vexter felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Genuine anger at an inferior species daring to mock him. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation that his crew recognized and feared. They insult us, Korthax observed unnecessarily, his mechanical arm gripping the edge of his console hard enough to leave dents in the metal. Commander, permission to demonstrate our full capabilities? Vexter stared at the blue-green planet hanging in the void before him. So fragile and yet so defiant, he had offered these mammals mercy, given them the chance to surrender with minimal bloodshed. And they responded with mockery. All ships, he commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet-wide channel to 300 vessels. Engage primary weapons. Target their orbital installations first. Then move to population centers. Show these primitives the price of arrogance. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 300 Krell warships, each mounting enough firepower to level a continent, opened fire simultaneously. The space between Mars and Earth lit up with plasma fire, thousands of energy bolts streaking toward their targets at relativistic speeds. It was a display of force that had brought mighty empires to their knees, that had silenced the war. Songs of the Dravix forever. Captain Daniel Morris watched the incoming fire on his sensors and felt his heart sink. They had perhaps 30 seconds before Sentinel-7 was reduced to its component atoms. 30 seconds before Earth's defenses were shattered. All ships, evasive maneuvers, he ordered, knowing it was futile but unable to simply sit and wait for death. Sophie Grant worked her controls frantically, adjusting shield harmonics and preparing point defense systems that everyone knew would be overwhelmed in seconds. Her hands moved with practice precision, even as her mind screamed that this was hopeless. In the lunar facility, Dr. Helen Carr watched her countdown timer with an intensity that made her eyes water. 8 minutes and 43 seconds until Project Silence reached full power, and the Krell had just opened fire. Doctor, the plasma barrage will reach Earth orbit in 27 seconds, Ryan Cole reported, his voice cracking with stress. We are not going to make it. Helen's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up emergency protocols that she had hoped never to use. The quantum entanglement weapon could be fired early, but at reduced power, the field might not reach all 300 ships. Might leave some functional, unable to retaliate. How many ships can we affect at current charge level? She demanded. Ryan ran the calculations with shaking hands. The mathematics were complex, involving field propagation rates and quantum coherence distances that he had only studied in theory. Maybe 220 ships, he estimated. The ones in the rear guard might be outside the effective radius. Helen made her decision in the space of a single heartbeat. 220 disabled ships was better than zero. And waiting for full power meant certain destruction for Sentinel-7 and dozens other stations. Fire now. She ordered. Ryan's hands slammed down on the activation control on the moon's surface. Invisible to the naked eye, but blazing across every sensor designed to detect quantum phenomena. A wave of entangled particles expanded outward at the speed of light. The wave passed through Earth's orbit in less than 2 seconds, washing over the human fleet without effect. The ships had been shielded against the quantum field, their critical systems isolated and protected. Then the wave reached the Imperial Armada, and the universe held its breath. Baxter saw his displays flicker once, a brief distortion that his tactical officer immediately flagged as an anomaly. Then every screen on his bridge went dark. Every control became unresponsive. Every system that relied on electronic communication simply ceased to function. The plasma fire that had been racing toward Earth dissipated harmlessly. The targeting systems that guided it no longer functional. 300 warships, the pride of the Crow Empire, became 300 drifting hulks in the space between heartbeats. Report. Baxter roared, but his crew could only stare at dead consoles in confusion and growing. Orokrothax tried his mechanical arm and found it still worked. The limb operated on basic servo motors rather than complex electronics. One of the few things on the ship that still functioned. Commander, all systems are down, he reported. His voice stunned. Weapons, engines, sensors, communications, everything that uses electronic controls is completely inert. Baxter felt ice crystallize in his blood. In 72 conquests, across a military career spanning 4 decades, he had never encountered anything like this. Life support? He demanded. Basic functionality only. Korthax confirmed after checking the manual gauges that lined the walls, relics from an earlier era of ship design. We have air and heat, but nothing else. On Sentinel-7, Captain Daniel Morris watched in awe as the massive fleet that had been about to annihilate him simply stopped, not slowly, not gradually, but instantly and completely. Sophie, he said softly, please tell me you are seeing this too. Sophie Grant ran every diagnostic she could think of, convinced that her sensors must be malfunctioning, but every reading confirmed the impossible. 300 enemy warships were drifting in space, their power signatures reduced to bare minimum, their weapons cold, their engines silent. Captain, they are dead in the water, she reported, wonder evident in her voice. I am detecting no active weapons, no maneuvering capability, no communications. They are completely helpless. Daniel opened a channel to Admiral Price, needing confirmation that this was real and not some elaborate hallucination brought on by stress. Command, this is Sentinel-7, he said carefully. Can you confirm the status of the hostile fleet? Price's voice came back immediately, carrying a mix of relief and something that might have been sadness. Confirmed, Captain, the Admiral replied. Project Silence has performed exactly as designed. The Krell Armada is neutralized across Earth, in command centers and on ships and in homes where families had gathered to await their fate. People began to realize that the certain death they had been facing was no longer certain. Some cheered, some wept, some simply stood in shocked silence in the lunar facility. Dr. Helen Carr collapsed into her chair as the tension that had sustained her for 18 hours suddenly released. Ryan Cole sat down hard on the floor, his legs no longer able to support him. We did it, he whispered. "We actually did it." Helen nodded slowly. But there was no triumph in her expression. She was thinking about the Krell crews trapped on those ships. Thousands of beings who had been rendered helpless by her creation. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "Now we have to decide what to do with them on the eternal conquest." Vexter forced himself to think past the shock and analyze the situation. Tactically, someone on one of the human worlds had developed a weapon that could disable Krell technology without destroying it, which meant they wanted prisoners rather than corpses. The question was why. "Commander," Korthax interrupted his thoughts. "We are receiving a transmission on the emergency frequency audio only. No data." Vexter activated the manual receiver. One of the few systems simple enough to still function. Admiral Price's voice filled the silent bridge. Calm and professional. "Krell forces, this is Admiral Kevin Price of Earth Defense Command," the transmission began. "Your ships have been disabled by a quantum entanglement weapon that has severed all electromagnetic communications within your fleet. Your weapons are inert. Your engines are offline, and your shields are down." Vexter listened with growing dread, waiting for the demands he knew would come: unconditional surrender, execution of senior officers, enslavement of the crews. "You have two options," Price continued. "Option 1. Power down all remaining systems and prepare to be rescued. We will bring you to temporary facilities where you will receive medical care, food, and humane treatment while we negotiate with your empire." Vexter's eyes widened. They were offering rescue? After he had come to conquer their world? "Option 2. Refuse our assistance and drift in space until your life support fails," Price said bluntly. "I estimate you have approximately 72 hours of air remaining at current consumption rates." There was a pause. And when Price spoke again, his voice carried a weight of absolute certainty. "I want to be clear about something. Commander Vexter," he said, using the Krell leader's name for the first time. "We had the capability to destroy your entire fleet. Dr. Carr's weapon could have been configured to overload your reactors, to cook every living being aboard your ships in an instant." Vexter felt his breathing quicken. They had chosen not to kill him. Chosen mercy when they could have chosen vengeance. "We chose not to because that is not who we are," Price explained. "Humanity has seen enough war, enough death, enough conquest. We will not become the monsters we oppose, even when we have the power to do so." The transmission paused again, and Vexter could hear muffled voices in the background. Price consulting with his staff. "You have 1 hour to decide," the Admiral concluded. "After that, we begin rescue operations with or without your cooperation." Price out. The bridge fell silent as the transmission ended. Vexter looked at the faces of his crew, beings who had followed him through countless battles and never questioned his leadership. "Commander," Korthax said quietly, "what do we do?" Vexter thought about the empire he had served for his entire adult life, an empire built on conquest and maintained through fear. He thought, the largest humanitarian operation in human history began within hours of the Krell surrender. Captain Daniel Morris coordinated with Lieutenant Sophie Grant and teams from 40 other Earth vessels to begin the systematic rescue of over 300,000 alien soldiers and crew members from their disabled ships. The logistics were staggering. Each Krell warship held approximately 1,000 beings who needed air, food, water, and medical care. Earth had to convert warehouses, stadiums, and military bases into temporary holding facilities faster than any construction project had ever been completed. Sophie piloted a shuttle toward the eternal conquest, the flagship where Commander Vexter waited with his senior staff. She had volunteered for this assignment despite Daniel's concerns, arguing that someone had to make first contact with the beings who had come to destroy them. "Shuttle 7 to Sentinel 7, she reported as she approached the massive alien vessel, beginning docking procedures with the hostile flagship. Daniel's voice came back immediately. Tense with worry for his young tactical officer. "Acknowledged, 7," he replied. "Remember, they may be defeated, but they are still dangerous. Do not take unnecessary risks." Sophie smiled slightly at his protective tone. She had a canister of knockout gas in her suit and a neural disruptor on her hip. Standard precautions for this kind of operation. The Eternal Conquest's docking bay opened manually. The crew inside using mechanical override systems that still functioned without electronics. Sophie guided her shuttle through the opening and sat down gently on the deck through her viewport. She could see dozens of Krell warriors waiting, their insectoid features unreadable to human eyes. They were armed with what looked like ceremonial weapons, blades and spears rather than the plasma rifles that no longer worked. The shuttle ramp lowered with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Sophie stepped out in her environment suit, carrying a datapad with translation software and a portable medical scanner. Commander Vexter stood at the front of the assembled crew, his posture somehow conveying both defeat and dignity. He was taller than Sophie expected, nearly 3 meters in height, with 4 arms and chitinous armor that seemed to be part of his body. "I am Lieutenant Sophie Grant of Earth Defense," she said clearly, the translator converting her words into clicks and whistles that the crew could understand. "I am here to coordinate your transfer to our medical facilities." Vexter studied the small human before him with curiosity. She showed no fear despite being surrounded by warriors who could tear her apart in seconds, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who held all the power in this negotiation. "I am Commander Vexter," he replied, his translator rendering his speech into English. "I have ordered my crew to cooperate fully with your rescue operations." Sophie nodded and consulted her datapad, pulling up the medical questionnaire that the xenobiology team had prepared. "We need to understand your species' basic requirements," she explained. "Atmosphere composition, temperature tolerance, dietary needs. We want to ensure you are comfortable during your stay." Vexter felt a strange sensation that he eventually identified as shame. This young human was treating him with more dignity than he had shown to any of the species he had conquered. "Why?" he asked suddenly, the question bursting out before he could stop it. "Why do you treat us with kindness when we came to enslave your world?" Sophie looked up from her datapad, her eyes meeting his through her helmet visor. She was silent for a moment, considering her answer. "Because someone has to break the cycle," she said finally. "If we respond to violence with violence, to cruelty with cruelty, then we become no better than our enemies. My people learned that lesson the hard way, through centuries of war among ourselves." She gestured around the docking bay, at the disabled ship and defeated warriors. "Besides," she added with a slight smile, "you are not our enemies anymore. You are our prisoners, which means you are our responsibility." Meanwhile, deep in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Kevin Price faced a different kind of challenge. He was on a quantum-encrypted channel with someone who had never spoken to a human before. Emperor Jalcrix of the Krell Empires. The Emperor's image appeared on the holographic display, his features similar to Vexter's but marked with age and adorned with ceremonial decorations that spoke of ancient authority. "I am Emperor Jalcrix." The translator rendered his introduction. "You hold my fleet, my warriors, my commanders. Name your terms for their return." Price had prepared for this conversation, had consulted with diplomats and strategists and xenopsychologists. But now that the moment arrived, he found himself abandoning his prepared remarks. "Your Majesty," he began, using the formal address that his advisors recommended. "Let me be direct. We do not want your territory, your resources, or your subjugation. What we want is peace." Jalcrix's mandibles clicked in what the translator identified as skepticism. "Peace," the Emperor repeated. "You defeat the mightiest armada ever assembled by my empire, humiliate our greatest commander, and claim you want only peace. Price nodded slowly, understanding the Emperor's disbelief in Zhao Krix's experience. Power was used to dominate, and victory was used to extract concessions. "Your Majesty, may I speak plainly?" Price asked, receiving a gesture that the translator indicated was permission. "Your empire is built on conquest. You take what you want because you have the strength to take it. But strength is not the same as wisdom." He pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's history. Fast-forwarding through thousands of years of human warfare, my species nearly destroyed itself through conquest and war, Price explained, watching the Emperor's reaction carefully. "We built weapons that could turn our entire planet into ash. We came within minutes of extinction multiple times." The display showed mushroom clouds rising over cities, chemical weapons deployed against civilians, biological plagues released as weapons. It was the darkest chapter of human history, laid bare for an alien emperor to judge. "We survived because we learned to choose cooperation over conquest," Price continued. "We learned that true strength lies in restraint, not in the willingness to destroy." Zhao Krix was silent for a long moment, his alien features impossible for Price to read when he finally spoke. His voice carried something that might have been curiosity. "And what does this wisdom tell you to do with my fleet?" He asked. Price took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would shock both the Emperor and his own staff. "We will return every single member of your fleet, unharmed and well cared for," he said clearly. "We will share the principles behind our quantum technology so that you can defend against it, not the complete specifications, but enough that you can develop countermeasures." Patricia Wells, standing beside him, looked like she wanted to object but held her tongue. They had discussed this, and she knew Price's reasoning, even if she disagreed with parts of it. "In exchange," Price continued, "your empire will immediately cease all military operations. You will release every world you have conquered and allow them to choose their own governance. You will pay reparations to those species you have harmed, and you will join the galactic community as a partner, rather than a conqueror." Zhao Krix's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound the translator struggled to interpret. It might have been laughter or anger, or simple disbelief. "You expect me to dismantle an empire that has stood for 3,000 years?" the Emperor demanded. "To surrender territory my ancestors conquered? To become subservient to species we have ruled?" Price shook his head firmly. "Not subservient," he corrected. "Equal. We are not asking you to bow to anyone. Your Majesty, we are asking you to stand beside them as partners." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Your empire has a choice," Price said bluntly. "You can accept these terms, transform from conquerors to cooperators, and join a new galactic order based on mutual respect, or you can refuse and watch as your fleet remains our permanent guests while the species you oppressed rise up against you without fear." It was a threat, but delivered without malice. Price was simply laying out the realities of the situation. "We have no desire to become an empire ourselves," he continued, "but we will not tolerate empires that spread through violence and subjugation. The galaxy has lived under the shadow of Krull domination for too long." Zhao Krix was silent again, and Price could see advisors moving in the background of the transmission, whispering urgently to their Emperor. This was clearly not how the Krull expected this conversation to go. "I need time to consider your terms," the Emperor said finally. "This is not a decision I can make alone. I must consult with my council." Price nodded, expecting this response. "You have 72 hours, he agreed. "In the meantime, your people will be treated with dignity and respect. Commander Vexter and his crew will be housed in comfortable facilities, given medical care, and allowed to communicate with their families." Back in the converted stadium that now served as a temporary facility for Krull prisoners, Commander Vexter found himself in the surreal position of being served a meal by humans. The food was synthesized to match Krell nutritional requirements, prepared by xenobiologists who had worked around the clock to ensure it was safe. A young human named Kyle Brooks, wearing the uniform of Earth's medical corps, approached with a tray. "Commander, we were not sure about the seasoning preferences of your..." 6 months had passed as the day 300 Krell warships fell silent in Earth's orbit. 6 months since humanity proved that mercy could be as powerful as any weapon. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Transformed by a species that most civilizations had never heard of before that fateful confrontation, Captain Daniel Morris stood on the observation deck of Sentinel-7, watching as ships from a dozen different species passed through Earth's orbital lanes in peaceful transit. Tyrellian science vessels, Dravix cargo haulers, human diplomatic cruisers, and even a few Krell merchant ships flying under new colors. Sophie Grant joined him at the viewport. Now wearing the insignia of a full commander, her promotion had come through last month, along with her assignment to humanity's first dedicated exploration vessel. "Hard to believe this is the same space where we almost died," she commented, gesturing at the bustling traffic that filled what had once been a battlefield. Daniel nodded, his weathered face showing a smile that had become more common in recent months. The weight of certain destruction had lifted from his shoulders, replaced by cautious optimism about the future. "The hardest part was convincing people that peace was possible," he replied, thinking back to the tense negotiations and heated debates that had followed Earth's victory. Half the planet wanted to use our advantage to establish human dominance. The other half wanted to share everything freely and hope for the best. Sophie turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. Admiral Price walked a fine line, she agreed, strong enough to demand real change, but generous enough to give former enemies a path forward. Not everyone could have done that. On the surface below, in a newly constructed facility that served as the headquarters for the Galactic Cooperation Council, Admiral Kevin Price addressed the assembled representatives from 47 different species. It was the largest gathering of alien civilizations in recorded history, and it was taking place on Earth. The council chamber had been designed to accommodate a wide variety of physiologies: Tyrellians who breathed methane, Dravix who required high gravity, aquatic Kelver who lived in pressurized tanks, and dozens of others. Human engineers had worked miracles to create a space where all could meet as equals. "Representatives, we gathered today to formalize the charter that will govern our cooperation," Price began, his voice translated simultaneously into 46 different languages. "This council is not a government. No species surrenders their sovereignty by joining. It is a forum for dialogue, a mechanism for peaceful resolution of disputes, and alliance for mutual defense." He paused, looking at the faces or face equivalents of beings from across the galaxy. 6 months ago, the Krell Empire believed that might made right, Price continued. They are not alone in that belief. Many species have pursued conquest, including my own, but we are here to prove that cooperation is stronger than conquest. In the audience, former Commander Vexter listened carefully. He no longer held military rank, having been stripped of his position by Emperor Jalcrix, but he had been appointed as the Krell Empire's liaison to the new council. Beside him sat Korthax, who had chosen to remain with his former commander rather than return to active military service. The two of them represented a Krell Empire that was struggling to reinvent itself, to transform from conquerors to cooperators. "The Admiral speaks well," Korthax whispered, his mechanical arm resting on the desk before him. "But words are easy, implementation will be harder." Vexter nodded in agreement. He had spent the past 6 months working with human diplomats and representatives from liberated worlds, learning just how much damage the Krell Empire had inflicted over centuries of conquest. "We owe them this effort," he replied quietly. We owe them far more than we can ever repay. Across the chamber, Dr. Helen Carr sat in the science section. Surrounded by researchers from multiple species, her quantum entanglement technology had been shared as promised. But only the defensive applications, and even those had proven difficult for most species to replicate Ryan Cole. Still, her assistant, despite numerous offers from other institutions, leaned over to show her a datapad. Doctor, the Turellian research team has successfully created a basic quantum shield, he reported excitedly. They say they could not have done it without your guidance. Helen smiled but shook her head slightly. They could have done it eventually, she said modestly. We just gave them a head start. Quantum mechanics does not care about species. The math works the same for everyone. A Turellian scientist named Velther, her crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, approached their section. Dr. Carr, on behalf of my people, I must thank you again, Velther said through her translator, her voice like wind chimes. The Krell held our worlds for 200 years. Your weapon freed us without a single Turellian casualty. Helen accepted the thanks gracefully. Though the weight of what she had created still troubled her sleep, Project Silence had been designed as a defensive weapon. But she knew that any weapon could be turned to aggression given the wrong circumstances. Use the knowledge wisely, she said simply, and remember that the goal is to prevent war, not to win it. Back at the podium, Admiral Price outlined the council structure. Representatives from each member species would serve rotating terms. Decisions would be made by consensus rather than majority vote. And enforcement would be handled by a joint defense force composed of volunteers from all participating civilizations. Humanity will provide the initial command structure and training, Price announced. But our goal is to phase out human leadership within 5 years. This must be a truly collaborative effort. Dravik's warrior named Gorthnak raised a claw for recognition. The Draviks had been among the fiercest opponents of the Krell, fighting a losing war for decades before being conquered. Admiral Price. My people remember when the Krell came to our worlds, Gorthnak said, his voice a deep rumble that shook the air. We fought with everything we had and still fell. How can we trust that this council will protect us better than our own warriors could? It was a fair question, one that Price had anticipated. The council's strength comes not from superior weapons or larger armies, he explained. It comes from the commitment of all members to support each other when one species is threatened. All species respond. The Krell could defeat any single civilization, but they cannot defeat all of us working together. He pulled up a holographic display showing the defensive network that humanity had helped establish over the past months. Early warning satellites, joint patrol routes, and rapid response protocols that would allow the Council to react to threats before they became invasions. More importantly, Price added, we have proven that defense does not require conquest. Earth could have used our victory to build an empire of our own, to demand tribute and subjugation from a grateful species. We chose not to because empires inevitably fall, but partnerships can endure. The chamber fell silent as representatives considered his words. Many of them came from species that had been victims of empire, had seen their cultures suppressed and their resources extracted by conquerors, a small furry being named Piprix, representing a species called the Kelvin, who had been among the first Krell conquests, stood on a raised platform to be visible. We Kelvin have a saying, Piprix said in a high, chirping voice. The tree that stands alone is first to fall. But the forest weathers any storm. Humanity has shown us how to become a forest. There were murmurs of agreement from many delegates, though Price could see that some remained skeptical. Earning trust after millennia of galactic conflict would take time. After the formal session ended, Price found himself approached by Vexter, the former Krell commander who had become an unlikely ally in the transformation of his empire. Admiral, may I have a moment? Vexter asked, His translator rendering his respectful tone accurately. Price nodded and stepped aside with the tall alien. Curious what the former enemy wanted to discuss. I have been authorized by Emperor Jalcrix to propose something unprecedented. Vexter began, choosing his words carefully. The Empire wishes to open our military academies to officers from other species. We have been conquerors for so long that we have forgotten how to be anything else. We need teachers. Price studied Vexter's face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only genuine humility. The Krell had lost more than a battle 6 months ago. They had lost their identity as the galaxy's dominant power. You want humans to train Krell soldiers? Price asked, making sure he understood correctly. Not just humans, Vexter clarified. We want instructors from all species who have agreed to join the Council. We need to learn cooperation from those who practice it, to understand service from those who embody it. Price was silent for a moment, considering the implications. Putting human military advisors on Krell worlds could be seen as either a gesture of trust or an attempt at infiltration. I will need to discuss this with my superiors and with the Council, he said finally. But personally, I think it is exactly the kind of bold step we need if we are serious about transformation. We cannot do it from a distance. Vexter's mandibles clicked in. What Price had learned to recognize as gratitude. Thank you, Admiral, he said quietly. I know my people have much to atone for. This is a beginning. Later that evening, Sophie Grant prepared for her departure on